All right. Okay, so we are back for our last video for this month, at least, with Deb, and we are just going to chat a little bit today. We're going to maybe go off topic a little bit, but we also want to especially touch on, as the world does start to quote unquote open back up, whenever that happens, whether we're in a first wave, second wave, whatever happens from here, how we keep our mental health and our positivity or our not positivity all in check as we maybe go back to work.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go back to work.
We are all going to get back to work. And okay. I mean, I want to like approach this from like a couple different prongs. Number one, I'm a producer as well. And so I am monitoring things all of the time as far as rules, regulations, all of that sort of stuff. I currently actually have a short film that I'm remotely producing in Seattle right now. And basically what that meant was that I made the decision that like I was not going to be on set because that would be one extra person who was traveling, who was going to like add, you know, potential to the, you know, possibility of COVID. And so I made the decision that like the things that I could do remotely. And so I think that number one, it's important to recognize that like the powers that be, the producers, the filmmakers are doing everything in their power to try and get us all back to work and to get us back to work safely. I know that like when I took this project on, I knew that it was in one location. It was with two actors who are sisters. It was also a very small crew. It's an indie film. And I knew that there was a lot of factors that I could control. And so I was 100% confident in being able to keep people safe. So I think that that's one thing to recognize is that like I've had talks with friends of mine who are actors who are like, I don't feel comfortable until there's a vaccine. I don't feel comfortable until X, Y, and Z. And I think that that is, again, so important to recognize like your level of safety and like how you're feeling about things, but to also recognize that like we're doing everything we can to make everyone safe and to also get us back to work.
Yeah.
As far as like, as far as acting stuff goes, I have to say that like, even though I just said that as a producer, as an actor, like I've booked a movie that's shooting in August and I automatically had the panic of like, well, should I accept this? Because is it going to be safe? Am I potentially going to put my life or another person's life at risk? And I think that, again, it's important to recognize that like, we're all in this together. We're all feeling anxious. We're all going through this. And it's important to, you know, put our faith in the union, put our faith in the producers and in the filmmakers that they're going to do this as safe as possible. Mm-hmm. As far as like, us getting back to work in a mental health space, I think that this is honestly the hardest one to recognize because, you know, it's funny, I said in an earlier episode, like, I'm very lucky in the fact that, like, I'm very lucky and I've also very strategically built my life around having other businesses that I run that mean that I'm financially stable. And I recognize my privilege in that, but I also recognize that I've worked my ass off in order to make that happen. And so for me, I have basically just been working a lot, like just working on non-actor stuff and just, you know, not creative stuff, but stuff,
day job stuff.
My bills, day job stuff. And so then last week when I actually got the audition for the movie, I had another audition and I had all of these like actor things come into my life. And I immediately started to panic. And I immediately started to get anxiety around like, am I prepared? Am I going to do well enough? Am I like,
because you haven't had to put on this actor outfit for a little while. And it feels weird to be like, oh, now I have to do, also we've done like one thing a day maybe for so long. And now you have to do multiple things in a day. Like, okay, exactly. I'm already getting anxious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I honestly like looked at my calendar last week and I saw like my calendar actually booked out and I started to like go into a spiral. And I think that it's important. And of course, then that immediately led to like, well, if I'm feeling this way about acting, does that mean that I shouldn't be an actor? Because like, I'm like acting should be happy and like joyful. And yet right now I'm so stressed about it. And so I think that it was very, you know, I have the self-awareness that I've worked on a lot with my therapist and with, you know, through other tools that I was like, Deborah, you're fine. Let's like take a breath. This is a good opportunity. It's a great script. This is something that you really want. So like put your creative energy into it. Take a break from your day job stuff. Like it's okay to prioritize, but it's also perfectly okay to feel that anxiety, because, and I think that's one of the things that we always think about is that like we don't put enough value in our feelings, and you know, this is something that I said in the first in our first video, was the importance of recognizing, you know, your biological, your physiological, and your environmental factors and how that relates to your mental health. And I think that it's very important to recognize that all of those things have to do with us also managing our calendars and managing our day-to-day life. I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is these loops that we get into in our brains, which are definitely going to be something that it becomes even more exacerbated as we go back to work, as far as like, is this safe? You know, like I'll go into stores sometimes, you know, like supermarkets, and go into loops about like feeling like there's COVID everywhere, which I know is not actually true, but I, you know, get into this loop where I feel like that. And I think that that's something that will, again, we're like, am I ever going to work again? You know, is this, you know, am I good enough to break through? You know, like all of that sort of stuff. Like, I think it's important to recognize that there's an actual name for that. And so the actual name is cognition, is like your cognitive distortions that happen in your brain. And that is basically the loops that your brain goes down. And those could be, for example, you seeing something as black or white, so seeing something as 100% good or 100% bad. It can also be when we get into like fortune telling, where it's like, I haven't heard from my agent for 3 months, therefore I'm never working again because they hate me and they decided they want to drop me, and they're, you know, like that sort of
the things that like our brain like comes up with from one idea, right? Oh my God, I do this all the time.
Right. So they've actually studied that there's 12 different types of cognitive distortions that people have in our brains. And the black and white and the fortune telling are the most common, but there's 10 others. And if you literally Google like cognitive distortions, it's fascinating, and you'll recognize those things in yourself. And I think it's, again, really important to have the self-awareness to be like, I'm fortune telling right now, Deborah, you're just going down a loop. You need to not, you know?
And just knowing that it has a name too, it makes it less like personally invasive.
100%. Yeah. And so, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, like, I don't know if you've heard of that word before, but
yeah,
that therapy is specifically geared towards recognizing those loops in your brain and breaking them. And so there's actually apps right now that will that will help you work through those things. Like there's cognitive behavioral therapy apps where you can go and be like, this is the thing that I'm trying to break, and then it will track that. It will help you track that. It will help you break that. So yeah, I think that that's like, again, a really important thing to recognize. I think that it's also just really important to recognize, just like about mental health in general, is, you know, another thing that we talked about earlier was the fact that it takes people 11, like on average, it takes someone 11 years to recognize that they need to go see a therapist, or they need to have some sort of, they need help. And I think that, you know, our brains are very difficult to figure out as far as where we are on the spectrum of depression, of anxiety. And that's because, you know, going back to those three things, like our physiological, our biological, and our environmental factors, the only one that can actually be tracked is your biological factor. And that is like actually how your brain is functioning, how it is processing things, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Our environmental, that cannot be scientifically tracked. Our physiological can a little bit, because it has to do with our DNA and like how we were raised and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's really important to recognize that there's all of these factors that have to do with our mental health, and and that it's difficult to track, and therefore it's difficult to treat, and it's difficult to figure out exactly what works for you. And I would highly, highly recommend that if you do not have some sort of mental health practice right now, to work on developing one. And again, that does not have to be, it doesn't have to necessarily be therapy. It doesn't necessarily have to be morning pages. It doesn't have to be meditation. Like, it really should be personal to you. But I would recommend that you start to process that. And I think that the other thing that I just want to touch on is, you know, even though I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I want to recognize the importance of actually that sometimes we do need medication, and medication is important. And I would, you know, strongly recommend that if you are feeling, you know, depressed for a long period of time, and, you know, something like that, that to take medication is perfectly okay. And I would also recognize that, you know, our health system is really screwed up. It's really effed. And I think that one of the biggest areas is in mental health. Like, if you go to the UK and you went to your doctor and was like, I'm feeling depressed, I need help, they would tell you to, or like, and you specifically wanted like antidepressants, they would tell you, like, we will give you that, but first we want you to start exercising for a month, and then come back to us, and then we'll discuss whether or not you actually need that. And they won't just tell you, they will also set you up with a trainer. They will set you up with a check-in group, so that they know that you are actually, you know, doing those things in order to make your environment better, in order to like make your, you know, body composition better. And then, because all of that obviously has to do with our mental health. And I mean, like, obviously we don't do that here. And that's a shame. And, you know, the last thing that I want to say is, I mean, mental health, I heard mental health compared to cancer the other day on a podcast, and I thought it was brilliant, because she was talking about how mental health is like cancer 100 years ago. Because cancer 100 years ago was, they didn't have x-rays, they didn't have CAT scans, they didn't have anything like that. They would only catch it when it was like stage 4. Mm-hmm. And people would be, you know, like basically close to death. Like, that's when they would start recognizing cancerous tumors, cancerous whatever, stuff like that. And at that time, there was such a big stigma around cancer that people would not want to tell their boss. They wouldn't want to tell their family, because they felt like this was something that they did to themselves. Like, I caught cancer. And so there was this whole stigma around cancer. And then CAT scans happened. And then other, just like being able to do preventative screenings happened, and all of that sort of stuff. And now, obviously, I mean, having cancer is incredibly scary and something that I obviously don't wish on anyone, but I think it's important to recognize that we have had all this advancement in the preventative and in, you know, screening sort of stuff. With mental health, again, we don't have that, because there's so much that comes into our own mental health and our own mental illness. And so it's important to be kind to yourself and recognize that, like, we're actually part of a mental health revolution right now. Like, there's so much that they're starting to understand about mental illness, and like where it can go and how it relates to you and all of that sort of stuff. And this is going to be, it's a renaissance right now, which I think is really, really cool. And so I think that it's just really important to recognize that, like, that whatever you're feeling, you are not alone. We all have, you know, levels of depression and anxiety. I was even talking to my therapist the other day about how it is normal to have suicidal thoughts. That is like 90%, she said 90% of people have suicidal thoughts at one point in their life.
Wow.
And that is just not something that we talk about. Like, we have this stigma around it. And it's important to recognize that, like, just because you have that thought, it does not mean that you are a bad person. It does not mean that you're actually going to commit suicide. There's such a big spectrum to that. but to just recognize that like you're feeling like that and that's okay. And like, let's do something about that. Like, let's treat the symptoms. Let's treat like, you know, go back to the root with that. And so I think that like, we're going to be feeling so many things as we go back into it, so many things. And I would encourage people to figure out what works for them as far as how to process things, find a therapist. Finding a therapist is like dating. It's probably not going to be the first person. You probably have to go through multiple therapists. And for people who are like, I can't afford therapy, I don't have health insurance, I don't whatever, there's so many incredible pro bono or nonprofit organizations that offer therapy for free or for like $10 a session. Like there really is a movement to try and get people help. And so like there is help out there. And if you're listening to this and you like want more specific resources or you want more information about something specific, like absolutely reach out to me. I, you know, am always happy to hear from people. And I'll, you know, point you to resources on my site, More Than You See, or I'll point you to other resources that I know. And I just think that like, again, we're all in this together. We're all going to feel all of the feelings, and that is okay.
And don't you think it just makes us better creatives when we feel our feelings, like, 100%. And know that we're feeling them?
Right. And like I said, like, because I think that it's important to feel that feeling and then to also be able to either turn it into like the emotion that we need to as an actor, or to be like, okay, so that's where I'm at today. Interesting. Noted. I'm going to deal with that later. Now I'm going to go put on this other character, you know, like both of those work.
Yep. Oh, Deb, this has been so great. I think that talking about this is I mean, it's exactly what I needed. So I just assume everyone else needs it. So I will have Deb all linked below for you guys to check out. You should absolutely check out More Than You See. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk about this with us. And you guys should send us more questions and maybe we could do more videos.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm always down to talk about mental health. So, and I have so much more to say and share. So absolutely.
Amazing. Okay, great. All right, guys. Well, we'll have to come back.